another episode of Paranormal Planet. I'm your host, Kalila Smith, and we've got some exciting stories to tell today. We're going to be talking about cryptos and all sorts of weird phenomena. And we have my guest here. We have Rusty Robinson of New Orleans, and he's got a lot of stuff he's going to share with us today. Welcome, Rusty. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Kalila. Thank you for having me. Glad to be
Thank
here.
you I'm so happy that you're doing this. You have led quite an exciting life here. Aside from your exciting real life, I mean, your hobbies alone are pretty exciting. As everybody can see, Rusty is a musician. He's got his guitars in the background. So he's also a club owner here in New Orleans and in Orange Beach. So, he's got a lot going on in the music world here. But I found out also that he is a big fan of cryptozoology. So he has been on some cryptozoology hunts, and he's also gone after some very strange phenomena, um, such as these very strange lights that are in Western Texas.
Yes.
Can you
Yep.
Can you tell us about that? Because I had never heard of those.
Oh, sure. Actually, they're pretty well known in West Texas, and that's kind of how I heard about them. Some people were telling me about them. I lived in Amarillo, Texas, for a number of years. In fact, just to back up a little bit, my profession of choice is actually that I'm a physician, and I have been an oncologist, particularly mostly in New Orleans. But during Katrina, I was in Amarillo, Texas, so I was in West Texas for a while. Anyway. So when I was in West Texas, people would tell me about the Marfa Lights. So Marfa, Texas, is sort of down in southwest Texas. So if you go east from El Paso or west from San Antonio, about 400 miles either direction, you'll find Marfa, Texas, which is this tiny little town, but a very interesting kind of eclectic, artsy town. At any rate, just outside of town, there is a like a mesa that you can stop, and you look off toward the mountains in the distance, and you can see these lights that at night that sparkle and flash and jump and move around, and they're different colors, and they're very unpredictable. Some nights they don't come at all, but most nights they come at least a little bit. And no one's ever been able to figure out what they are. They back up to I think it's called the Chinati Mountain, Chinati, which is right at the Mexican border. And there's nothing there. There's no development over there. They're not car headlights. There are no roads that way for like miles and miles. No buildings, no houses, no nothing. So nobody really knows what causes the Marfa Lights, but they're fascinating. The state has actually built a viewing station off of the highway there, and I can't remember which highway that is. I think it's US 90, I believe. But they built a very nice little viewing station so you can pull over in the evening and watch for them to come out. And like I said, most nights they do. I went there with my wife a few years ago, and she always kind of poo-poos my interest in unusual or eclectic or paranormal things. Anyway, so I talked her into going with me, and we went to Marfa, and we went to the viewing site, and I'll be darned, the lights came out that night, and they were pretty dramatic that night. They were jumping around, and there were different colors. And I remember she looked at him and said she was aghast. She just couldn't believe it that it was really there. And to this day, we'll admit she has no idea what the lights were, but she knows they were really there. So we made a little progress on paranormal stuff with the Marfa Lights, and apparently they've been there for hundreds of years. Like they were reported by the Native Americans and Spanish and Mexican explorers to that area. So they predate, in fact, electricity or cars or anything. So no one knows what they are.
Oh, that's amazing. So now how big are they? I mean, because I know some people see orbs, so you and they're kind of small.
They look like stars almost because we think they're far away, just darting about on the mountains. So it's like little pinpoints of light that sometimes will flash. So I'll see like a tail when they flash. But they're not just all white. Like sometimes you see red ones, sometimes you see blue or green ones. I mean, they're all colors, apparently.
That's interesting. Very, very interesting. Hold that thought one second. Wrong eye. Okay. I don't, this whole mirror thing, I gotta get a little smudge. That's right there. Okay. All right. There we go. So Have you talked to any of the natives in the area? Like, usually they'll have some sort of a kind of explanation for things.
Yeah, we did. Like I said, it's an interesting little town. It's like an arts town, basically. They have several studios and various other things. There's been several films that have been made, shot out there because it's so dramatic looking. It's out in the middle of the desert and surrounded by mountains. Um, so there's sort of an artistic history in the town. So yes, the people are actually very proud in general, I think, of the Marfa Lights. Um, I have not found anybody that tells me they think they know what they are. You know, they will tell you it dates back to before white men were there.
Oh,
So who
wow.
knows?
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, we here in Louisiana, you probably have heard of this. We have the fifole,
Yeah,
which is, the fifole is the light that comes up in the swamp, and they say if you follow it, you're going to find the treasures of John Lafitte. And usually, people follow it, and they get lost in the swamp, and we never see them again. But and people, I think scientists have pretty much attributed that to swamp gas of
right.
some sort. So, there was a logical explanation, scientific explanation that came along. And lots of times that will happen. So I'm going to have to read up on that. Did you get any photographs of any of this while you were out there?
There have been photographs made. We just had our iPhones with us, and it's pretty difficult to do that at night with an iPhone. It
Right.
doesn't come out looking like anything. So we did try, but we didn't get anything. But you can look it up. There, it'll be in, just even in Wikipedia, you'll be able to find it, and there'll be some photographs of it.
Okay. Okay. Now, you've also gone on some Bigfoot hunts.
I
Is that
have.
correct?
I have.
Yeah.
I've actually been interested in that as a phenomena for many years. I can actually remember when I was, I guess, 10 or 11 years old, I went to the very first movie that showed the Patterson Gimlin film. So back in 1968, I think it was. And my grandfather took me to it. And I remember we thought it was just amazing. We both loved it. Anyway, so I'd kind of been interested in it for a long time. And then I actually had an experience, I actually witnessed
Oh,
what
okay.
I
Tell us
think
about that.
was whatever this thing is. So yeah, I was in college actually, and I was going to college in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was working during the summer at a lake just across the Mississippi River in Arkansas. That was an old, as I call it, oxbow lake, where the Mississippi River changes course and leaves the lake behind. So I was working as a lifeguard caretaker, basically, during the summer. Well, at any rate, there was another lifeguard who was working out there. Actually, his family owned it. He and I would stay out in the evenings after everybody would leave because we would sleep out there, and would go fishing in the evening. So one night about 7 p.m. and it was June, so it was still bright sunshine, and we're out fishing, and we're very quietly kind of floating down the parallel to the bank, using a trolling motor or something. So we're not making any noise, very quiet, and we're just kind of drifting along, and suddenly we hear something on the shore, and we're probably 10 yards maybe offshore in the water in the boat. We look up and we see the head and shoulders and maybe part of the chest of whatever this thing was. It was man-like in the sense that it had had a face, had nose, ears, eyes, all of those things. The head, chest, shoulders were all covered with a dark brown, almost black hair. The face was, I've struggled to describe it over the years, but it was somewhere between, if you can imagine, what you would think a gorilla's face would look like and a human's face would look like. That's all I can really say about it.
Wow.
Um, it was looking directly at us. I think we like just stumbled up on it. You know, we surprised it because we were being quiet. Um, he looked at us. We looked at it for maybe 10 seconds, and it turned around and ran back up into the bush. In fact, we couldn't see more than like I said, like at the mid chest because the brush was so heavy at the water's edge. So it was just sticking its head up behind the bushes, basically. So it saw us, and it turned, ran back in the woods. We heard it for, a few seconds running away, and then never saw or heard anything about it again. After that, he and I went back into, we had a little cabin up on the lake, and trying to talk about it and figure out what it was. And and we mentioned the possibility that could be Bigfoot or whatever that is. And but never really came to any conclusion about it. And we never saw any or heard or anything else that we would associate with that again. We were out there for the entire summer, so we were there, another 2-3 months after that. So that was my experience. Then I never had another one. In fact, he and I didn't even talk about it for the longest time because we didn't really know what to say to people, So we saw this thing. We don't know what it was. Maybe it was Bigfoot, but nobody in those days, Bigfoot reporting was much less organized or available, I guess. And it was pre-internet, pre all that. This was 1980. In fact, was when this happened. So I was in college. So we just didn't say anything about it, really, to almost anybody. Then actually, when the Bigfoot research organization came along and posted their website where you could post, experiences, I did that. And after I did that, I've had several people contact me from various areas asking me, okay, tell me about this. And I explained it to some of the people from the big BFRO or Bigfoot Research Organization. And I've been in contact with, excuse me. My chair fell there for a second. Sorry.
Oh my goodness. Are you
It
okay?
was getting back at me, I guess. Okay. At any rate, so I've been contacted by several other people, including who is now a good friend in Alabama, and I guess I won't give his name here, but a very nice guy who has been interested in Bigfoot in Alabama, particularly in the Appalachian Mountains as they move into Alabama for many years. And he's invited me to go on several trips with him into the mountains to look for him. And I have gone. I can't say I've seen anything or heard anything on those trips. I've been on, I guess, 3 of them now that, I would swear was Bigfoot. You always hear things out in the woods that you can't say what they are, but, and I know some people will make claims that I don't agree with. So I try to be as objective as I can be about it. I actually had the opportunity to meet actually a couple of people who were very well known, if you want to call it that, in the field of Bigfoot, Sasquatch. One of which was Lauren Coleman, who has been involved in that area for many years. He's an author, researcher, has a museum of cryptozoology it's in Maine. I believe it's in Portland, Maine. And we actually went there and saw him and talked to him for a good while. It was very nice about it, very pleasant. And we talked about the subject for maybe an hour or so. And then on another trip, I got to meet Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who is a professor of anthropology at Idaho State University in Pocatello, Idaho. And I went to his lab and we met and talked about it for a long time. He keeps saying he's going to come see us in New Orleans and maybe do a talk for us. He's had some health problems lately, unfortunately, so we haven't been able to make that happen yet. But we stay in contact and, talk about if I see something new in the news or I think is interesting, I'll send it to him and say, what do you think about this? He has probably the definitive textbook out on Bigfoot, if you want to call it a textbook. It's called Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. It's probably the most objective, professional examination of that topic that I've ever seen. I think Jeff, Dr. Meldrum, believes basically that if it's real, it is in fact a undiscovered primate or an ape in a sense that has been living in North America in very small numbers for a very long time. And we still have not found it yet because it's relatively intelligent. It's an ape. It knows how to hide. It's made it's kept itself alive for millennia by doing that. And I tend to agree. If it exists, that's what it is. So that's kind of my take on Bigfoot and Sasquatch, I guess.
Yeah, you ought to reach out to him and tell him I'd like to interview him. We could add him.
Sure. He'd be glad to.
That would be awesome. Going to take one.
Yeah, Dr. Meldrum is very interesting. He takes his approach. It's very refreshing to talk to him because he's very professional. He's very articulate, very academic. He sounds like a college professor. So he
Cool.
sounds like an authority. He's not like, some of the people, God bless them, that do Bigfoot things come across sounding kind of weird or out there, really, spacey.
Well,
And
you're
he's
gonna
not
get
that at all.
I think you're gonna get that anywhere. Now, I'd like to talk to somebody that's really studied it because, I have some questions. I had a couple of experiences. I don't know if I think I shared them with you at some point, maybe. And I would be interested in hearing what he's got to say because I have questions too, like why haven't we found a carcass in all this time? Why haven't we found any evidence of any type of, you know, um, anything? There's never any sort of secretions from this thing. There's no fecal matter anywhere. There's nothing, and there's nobody can ever give me a definitive
Right.
answer. So
Physical evidence is the
you know,
big issue. No, you're
somewhere
exactly
there
right.
should have been one that we would have seen, unless they're so intelligent they're burying their dead.
And I think I think they are intelligent. Now, I think what you have to remember about primates in general is that they tend to live in areas that are high humidity, high forest, high plant life, and corpses, number one, don't survive very long there. They get eaten. Like if you leave a deer carcass out in the woods, it'll be gone in 3 or 4 days because
Okay, fair
nature's
enough.
very
Yeah.
efficient at taking care of that. So I think that's part of it. I think they're very small numbers. I suspect if, like I said, if they are real, there's probably a handful of populations in the United States that are relatively small, but big enough for a breeding purpose, like maybe no more than 2 or 3,000 in the whole U.S. Most of them are probably in the Pacific Northwest, which is where most of the sightings come from. But there's other populations in, for example, East Texas and Arkansas and Oklahoma. There's probably a small population in Florida, people believe, and a handful of other places. So you're not going to find them just anywhere to begin with. You have to be and I've said this about other things that associated with medicine. If you want to find, or if you want physical evidence of something, you have to have two things. You have to have the thing, whatever it is you're searching for,
Right.
and you have to have the searchers for it. And those two things have to match up in exactly the same place. If the thing is very rare, then the likelihood of having a searcher and the thing together, is multiplied. Or the difficulty is multiplied. So I think that's part of it too. I will admit I'm not absolutely convinced, but I think you can make arguments that will address the lack of a body. And I'm also absolutely convinced that the only thing that's truly going to say they exist is finding, somebody shooting one, basically. I think
Yeah,
it has
yeah,
to happen. I mean, I know a lot of people are against
yeah, yeah.
shooting, but
I would be against shooting one also. Well,
we're
it's
never going to be able to prove it. Films and video is
yeah.
never going to do it, no
No,
matter
well,
how
you had
good those
people that
films are.
faked it. You had people that faked it and then admitted faking it, and that
Right.
ruins it for everybody. But now, where you had your experience, was that the same area of Arkansas where they had the Boggy Creek creature?
No, that was one of the interesting things about it. Boggy Creek was over in the western part of the state by Texas, so it's in that sort of general area of East Texas, Southwest Arkansas, Oklahoma, and even North Louisiana. We were on the east side of the state, just next to the Mississippi River, where it runs between Tennessee and Mississippi, and really within a mile of the river itself. Now, I will say that area is very wooded. It's relatively isolated. The area along the river, because it's in the floodplain, is not inhabited really. I mean, there's a stretch of land, probably a couple of miles, away from the river that is pretty much isolated cypress and oak and pine, woodland. That's not, in other words, it's almost like it would be like a highway almost. So I often wondered if it is real, maybe the one that we saw was just passing through. And the other thing I remember about that I've often thought about, that summer, the summer of 1980, was like the hottest on record in that area in Mid-South, basically. They had, I forget, 15, 20 days over 100 degrees, no rain during that time. So it was very dry. I wonder if the thing was passing through, was coming down to the lake to cool off, basically, or get some water, and we just happened to stumble upon it there. And that was an isolated individual. And then he just moved on, so we never saw him again.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we'll never know until somebody can really prove something definitive.
I think
You
it's
know.
going to have to be a body where you can get both, just visual evidence, and you have DNA evidence. I don't even think DNA evidence by itself will do it, because if you take DNA evidence, say you manage to get a blood sample or a small tissue sample or something,
Mhm.
and you extracted DNA, all that's going to tell you is it's an unknown species. That doesn't say what it is, it just says what it's not. So
Right.
I think you have to have a body. I mean, I don't like the fact that you have to kill something any more than
Yeah.
most people, I guess.
Yeah. No.
But if we're going to really prove that it's there and then potentially be able to protect it legally, then we got to prove that it's there. You got to have a body. We're never going to protect it without that.
Well, now I did a lot of research over in the Miami area after Katrina, when we weren't too sure if New Orleans was coming back or not, and if we were going to even, be able to continue with tours here. I checked out the Miami area because it was familiar to us and so forth. And one of the things I found very interesting, they have stories of the skunk ape
Right.
out, and is what they call it. It's basically the same kind of thing, but in Miami, in the Everglades. At some point in time in the early colonization days, there was a ship that brought over some large types of chimpanzees, and they call them napes, North American apes.
Hmm.
And they are different from the standard chimpanzees that we know of, in that these chimpanzees like to swim. They'll go out in the water,
Huh.
and they're bigger than some of the chimpanzees that we customarily hear about. And you don't hear much about them over in the Everglades, but they do exist, and they have seen some of them, and they've proven it,
Huh.
that there are like, I don't know if you'd call them a family or a horde
Population, yeah.
or population then of these napes that are in the Everglades, and they were brought over by ships from Africa, and these animals escaped and they started populating down in the Everglades. I mean, I think probably in the US, the Everglades are probably have more invasive species than
Oh,
any
yeah.
place, in the US. And they just have adapted to the conditions there. And I guess coming from Africa, it would have probably been very similar with the
Sure.
temperatures and terrain and everything. But yeah, these particular apes supposedly exist out there
Hmm.
in those forests off of the Everglades.
Well, that's
And
interesting. I was not
been there
familiar with
for
that story.
yeah, they've been there for since the 1800s.
Wow.
So for a couple of centuries, they've been out there, and they
I'm going to
survive.
have to look that up.
Yes, yes, do. In fact, the next time I see you, I'm gonna have to give you a little copy of my Miami book. It's little, but it's got some of that in
Okay.
there, and some of the other different invasive species that's out there. Um, you know, that at one time, they were considered to be cryptids. For instance,
Right.
people didn't realize that they could have Burmese pythons or
Right.
anacondas in the Everglades,
Yep.
but they do, and they were used to seeing,
Oh, they're a real problem.
Oh yeah, there's definitely anacondas out there from the Amazon that people I
And
get.
they're eating the native species, and kind of out competing them for that habitat, which is a
Oh
problem.
yeah, yeah, and they're huge. Well, they're
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
huge. And in fact, I was watching something. I was watching some kind of a video. This is quite a few years ago, but probably about 12 years ago, and there was an unidentified animal that was out in the Everglades, and finally somebody saw it and figured out what it was, and it was a leopard seal.
Wow.
And you don't expect to see a leopard
No,
seal in Florida, but yet
absolutely.
there, some were brought there. Apparently, it's big money in Florida bringing in illegal
Yep.
animals and so forth, and apparently sometimes they get loose. But
Yep.
there's actually leopard seals out and they're very aggressive
Huh.
um, towards animals and people. So they're quite dangerous as seals go. So you don't expect something like that to be out, killing
Right.
animals in the Everglades, but they have it.
Yeah.
So there's been quite a few cases of, animals who get displaced, and then people are like, wait. And I think one of the best examples, if the displaced cryptid was the Cooper chopper, the chopper. I always get the Cooper chopper.
Chupacabra.
Yeah, that's those things. They we hear about them all over the place. There's some supposedly in Puerto Rico, but mainly over in Mexican, South Texas. They
Right.
had a lot of them. And a few years back, there was a police car that was driving down one of the dusty side roads out in the desert, and you see this animal out, and he's chasing this thing, and it's running, and he's got it on video, and you see it. It's got bluish skin and so forth. Well, they finally captured one. They found one that was dead out in the desert, and it was examined and checked by a veterinarian and everything. And it turned out that it was a hybrid coyote of sorts. There was a
Right.
particular type of wolf that bred with the coyotes, and because of that interbreeding, that was not a good mixture. It made them predisposed to a particular type of mange
Right.
that was
Right.
causing them to lose all their hair. Their skin was turning blue, and they were suffering from all of these problematic things and eventually
Yep.
kind of attacking animals because they were out there starving because the other animals didn't want anything to do with them. So
Right.
that kind
No,
of
we used to hear
experience.
about that in Amarillo, about the so-called chupacabras. It's very common among the Hispanic population. They talked about it a lot. The ranchers would acknowledge them there because they would lose livestock to them occasionally. And basically that's what they figured they was just mangy coyotes or dogs that had mated with coyotes or something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it turned out to be. So I think eventually, hopefully, I would like to find out because I want to find out from my own experience. I think anytime we've seen some of these things, we want to know what we saw. And like you, when
Sure.
I had my experience in the Honey Island swamp, I grew up hearing about the Honey Island swamp monster.
Right.
And I thought I almost hit one right on the highway. And it was very foggy, and I was driving down the highway, and all I saw was the hairy leg. And I was in a minivan, so it was pretty tall. And I had that distinct smell afterwards, that wet dog smell that they describe so much. But here it was the 80s. There was no internet. There was no really, you couldn't just look it up in the phone book. There was nobody to call. There was nobody to ask. Called a few swamp tour companies, and they kind of, blew me off. They weren't real interested. I guess they thought it was a prank. But, I have no proof that I saw it. I know what I
Right.
saw. I know what I smelled. I know what I experienced. And I may never find out what it is, but it's always had me curious because I'd like to know
Sure.
what exactly it
Well, that's
was.
why we didn't talk about it for the longest time because we thought, what are we going to say? Are people going to think you're nutty? Or so how can, because you don't have any proof, there's nothing really to say.
Though, see, that's true. And back then, you didn't really talk about it because all you really had was a little bit of speculation. And then Boggy Creek came out, and everybody goes, yeah, it's just a movie, though. It's just a movie. And then, of course, you had the Patterson film, and people kind of fell for it for a while. But once, that was disproven, then it was like, oh, well, there you go. And then I think for a while, at some point, I don't remember what year it was, somebody had claimed they had a carcass, and it turned out to be
Yep.
a costume, and they
Yep.
put it in the freezer. And it was just like, why do people do that? You ever get so
Yeah,
excited
I
about
know.
it?
You can't believe
Oh,
somebody thinks they're not going to be found out with that. I mean,
no,
I don't get that.
no, it's just, yeah, you can't find out about it. But what's interesting about it, now I did a little filming last year with the gentleman. I can't recall his name. It was Alex, long name. He was from up north somewhere, and he was doing some television shows on these particular different types of Bigfoots in different areas. Because the interesting thing, the one thing they all have in common is that every civilization, every culture all over the world, no matter where you are, they have legends of these things. And
Right.
he's been on probably more Bigfoot hunts than anybody. So, you know, I'll actually have to go back and see what episode, because I don't even know what episode I was in. I kind of did the show and then I got busy and it was like, oh, I'll go look at it. And then I just kind of lost track of him. But he was on some things and he claimed to have at least heard the howl that they do, because
Hmm.
supposedly this blood curdling howl that they make. And I mean, I've been out
Yeah,
in the
that was an
woods.
interesting thing about my experience way back in 1980. We neither smelled anything nor heard any kind of vocalization. We heard it moving, just stepping on the underbrush, but we couldn't tell that it made any kind of vocalization.
Yeah, now they claim there's this howling that they do. They hear from way off. I've never heard it. I even went out into the woods with a group of people, and this is many years ago, probably about 20, 25 years ago, with a group of people in East Texas. And it was some little small state park right over the Louisiana-Texas border. And there was nothing. I mean, we hung out there. There was a lot of mosquitoes. And
Yep.
after a while, it was like, well, I think we'll go back to my room because this is not really exciting. But and then while you're out there, you're always wondering, do I really want to see this? Do I really, really want to see
Right.
one? What are you going to do with it when you see one? So, but I would love to have somebody prove it, either just prove it completely or prove it completely.
Right.
But like you
It's
said,
very hard to prove a negative. In other words, you can't really say there's nothing there with any objectivity.
right.
So somebody's going to have to find it for it really to be determined that it's there. So
Well, right. It's got to be excluded, though. They got to exclude everything else
Right.
and then finally say, that it is. But I think it's very interesting. And I hope that at some point somebody can come up with something, at least somewhere, because it's too coincidental that it's not just a North American thing. They
Right.
have them everywhere. They've got them in the Himalayas. You've got the Yeti. You've got these things all over the place. And the Native Americans, I know in Louisiana, the Choctaw, they had the word for them. And, they called it the Rougarou. And it was a different spelling. It was Rugu. Rugaru, a little bit different spelling than what people refer to as the Rougarou, which was the Lougarou, which was the werewolf. So they had this similarity in this word, but to the Native Americans, it meant something very different. It was a big creature. So
Right.
for us to have those kind of legends that are that old, that these earlier cultures have seen and they describe, there has to be something. And this is a little bit off the cuff, but sometimes I wonder if there aren't really like portals where these are some sort of interdimensional kind of beings that are crossing over. That might sound a little weird for you, being a doctor and a scientist and a man of
I am
science,
not so,
know.
I don't have such a high opinion of myself that I can't say there's not such a thing.
You know?
And, therefore I wouldn't make fun of anybody. I wouldn't tell anybody it doesn't exist. It's another one. So you can't prove that it doesn't exist. What I would say, or the way I look at it is, how can you explain an unknown or something that's not understood, like Bigfoot, with something else that's not understood, or really, so, it's always easier to explain something that's not well understood with a documented, objective fact. So that's how I look at it. Maybe, I won't say it can't happen.
Well, we can only hope, right?
Right.
We can hope. All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on here. This has been a complete pleasure and an honor to have you on here. And I am hoping we'll get you back again, because you've got some more other surprises for the guest out here. You've the next time I'd like to have you on is to talk a little bit about your experience, because you actually spent some time at the Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, I have. Yep.
And that's a whole other show. That is a completely other episode, because that's going to be a lot, because you and your wife both spent some time there, right?
We did.
And that is a fascinating subject as well, with skinwalkers. But I want to thank you, and we're going to say good night to everybody. But keep an eye open, because we are going to have Mr. Rusty back, and probably have him come back and look at some other stuff and get his opinion on him if he thinks it's real or fictional that we have. So he's going to be working with us a lot. But again, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.
And everybody out there, thank you for joining in, and watch out for another episode of Paranormal Planet. Good night, guys.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.